Let me ask you something right now, and I want you to really sit with this question. What if the most powerful man in the world, a sitting president of the United States, had his name mentioned by an Epstein victim not once, not twice, but in multiple FBI interviews, describing acts so horrific that when I read the documents, I had to stop and reread them just to make sure I was reading them correctly? What if the very man who signed the law to release these files, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, turned out to be the same man those files were pointing at? And what if the Department of Justice, his own Department of Justice, run by his own appointees, quietly removed those specific files from the public database and only put them back when investigative reporters caught them doing it? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not a political talking point. That's what happened. And today, we are going to walk through every single piece of this, document by document, date by date, because the American people deserve to know the truth. And the truth, right now, is that the Epstein files have just ripped open a wound that Washington, D.C. has been desperately trying to keep closed. So let's start at the very beginning, because context matters enormously here. Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire financier, the convicted sex offender, the man who built a decades-long empire of child sex trafficking while rubbing elbows with the most powerful people on the planet, died in a federal prison cell in August of 2019 under circumstances that remain deeply suspicious to this day. The official cause of death was suicide by hanging, but the man had broken bones in his neck consistent with strangulation. He was taken off suicide watch despite previously attempting to hang himself. His cellmate was mysteriously transferred out the night before, and the cameras monitoring his cell, the cameras malfunctioned. Now, I'm not here today to relitigate his death. What I am here to do is talk about what came after: the files, the cover-ups, the political games, and the women who, even now, are still fighting to have their stories heard. Because that's really what this is about at its core. It's about those women. It's about the girls who were 13, 14, 15 years old when they were handed off by Epstein to powerful men who thought they were untouchable. And every single time Washington treats those files like a political football, every single time a document gets quietly removed from a government database, it's those women who pay the price. So let's honor them by telling the truth. Now, during the 2024 presidential campaign, Donald Trump made a very specific promise. He looked into cameras and he told the American people he would release the Epstein files. He said it with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. He said it as a weapon against the political establishment, implying that Democrats and elites were hiding dark secrets. And people loved it. His base ate it up. Release the files became a rallying cry. Then something interesting happened when he actually got into office. He hesitated. He stalled. He personally lobbied Republican members of Congress to slow down the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Multiple reports confirmed he was making calls, hosting meetings at the White House, trying to pump the brakes on the very transparency he had promised. Think about that for a second. The man who campaigned on release everything was quietly working the phones to stop exactly that. Now, he was eventually outmaneuvered. The bipartisan support for the bill was simply too strong. It passed the House 427-1, and the Senate unanimously approved it. Only one member of Congress voted against it, Republican Clay Higgins of Louisiana, and even he hasn't given a coherent explanation why. Trump, cornered by the political reality, signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law on November 19th, 2025. But here's the thing. Signing the law and complying with the law turned out to be very different things. The law required the Department of Justice to release all Epstein-related documents by December 19th, 2025. When that deadline came, the DOJ released a relatively small number of files, and the response from both sides of the aisle was immediate outrage. Bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats alike said this doesn't even come close to what the law requires. The redactions were so heavy that entire pages were blacked out. In some cases, 550 pages in a row were completely redacted. And here's the part that should make every single one of you angry. A faulty redaction technique meant that when members of the public tried copying and pasting the blacked out text into another application, the hidden content was revealed. The government didn't even do the cover-up correctly. Among the content that was unintentionally revealed was an unverified FBI tip alleging that Trump had witnessed something so disturbing: the killing and disposal of an infant born to a 13-year-old trafficking victim. that I want to pause here and note clearly. The DOJ labeled these specific allegations as unverified and sensationalist. Those are their words. But the question isn't just about what's verified. The question is, why were these files being redacted at all? The law said release everything. The DOJ said we're protecting victims. But investigators and reporters found something very different going on. Then came January 30th, 2026. The DOJ dumped over 3 million additional pages, more than 2,000 videos, and 180,000 images. They called it compliance. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche stood at a podium and said more than 500 lawyers worked through weekends and holidays to process these files. He described it as reviewing 2 Eiffel Towers worth of pages. And yes, the sheer volume was staggering. But lawmakers who actually went to DOJ offices to review the unredacted files came back with a very different story. Representatives Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California, and Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, 2 men who rarely agree on anything, came out of that DOJ briefing room and said the same thing. The redactions were heavy, unnecessary, and suspicious. Khanna even went to the House floor and read aloud 6 names that he said had been concealed in the files. And what happened next tells you everything you need to know about what Washington is actually protecting here. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche criticized Khanna for doing it. The government's own second-in-command at the Justice Department attacked a sitting congressman for revealing information that the law literally required to be made public. Blanche said Khanna had forced the unmasking of completely random people with no connection to Epstein. Khanna pushed back. He said the DOJ was purposefully muddying the waters on who was a predator and who was merely mentioned in an email. And that's where we hit the heart of the issue. Because there's a massive difference between being mentioned in an email and being named by a victim. And the DOJ has been doing everything in its power to blur that line. And now, we get to the part of this story that broke open in the last 2 weeks and is shaking Washington to its core. Because among the millions of pages released on January 30th, there was one specific document that caught the eye of investigative journalists. It was an FBI internal PowerPoint presentation, a slide deck, that federal investigators had compiled internally, summarizing the most significant, prominent names that appeared across the Epstein and Maxwell investigations. And on that slide deck, according to multiple reports from CNN, NPR, and the Miami Herald, the name Donald Trump appeared, not as someone who received an email from Epstein, not as someone who attended a fundraiser, but as someone accused directly by a victim of sexual assault. Specifically, the slides documented an FBI lead that was deemed credible enough that it wasn't just filed away. It was forwarded to the FBI's Washington field office. The woman was interviewed by FBI agents not once, not twice, but 4 times between 2019 and 2021. 4 times. When investigators find a witness credible enough to interview 4 times, that's not nothing. That's the FBI taking something seriously. And Julie K. Brown, the Miami Herald journalist who arguably knows the Epstein story better than any reporter alive. The journalist whose work led to the reopening of the federal case against Epstein after he was given a sweetheart deal in Florida. Julie Brown reported that DOJ officials who spoke with this woman found her credible. You don't interview someone 4 times if you don't find them credible. So who is this woman? She cannot be named. NPR policy, CNN policy, PBS policy, all responsible news organizations protect victims of sexual abuse from being identified. But here is what is documented in the FBI's own records. She first contacted the FBI's National Threat Operations Center on July 10th, 2019, just days after Epstein's arrest. She was reaching out on behalf of a friend. That friend, according to the documents, alleged that she had been introduced to Trump by Jeffrey Epstein in the early 1980s, when she was between 13 and 15 years old. The location she described was a very tall building with large rooms, consistent with descriptions of properties associated with both Trump and Epstein in New York and New Jersey during that era. According to the FBI's own 302 documents, those are the official interview summaries that FBI agents write after witness interviews. The woman described Trump in graphic terms. She told investigators that Trump immediately did not like her because she was, in her words, a boy girl, meaning she was tomboyish. She alleged that Trump sexually assaulted her. She alleged that when she bit him, He punched her in the head and demanded that Epstein remove her. She described 2 additional interactions with Trump, but, according to the FBI record, asked to move on to another subject when agents tried to press for details. She said she was afraid. She expressed concern about implicating powerful individuals. Her attorney told FBI agents during one of the sessions that the woman was worried about fear of retaliation. And now here's where this goes from disturbing to infuriating. When the DOJ released 3 million pages on January 30th, 2026, those FBI interview summaries were not included. 3 of the 4 interview 302s were simply gone. Not redacted, gone. Not there. CNN did a systematic analysis of the released files and discovered that dozens of FBI witness interview reports, called 302s, were missing from the public database. Among the missing records were the 3 interview summaries in which the woman described Trump by name. The one summary that was released, the one interview that was included, happened to be the interview where the woman focused on Epstein and did not mention Trump. The 3 interviews where she named the president, missing. The DOJ's explanation when reporters confronted them, the files were incorrectly coded as duplicative. They were accidentally omitted. It was a mistake. But think about the mathematical improbability of that explanation for a moment. Out of the 4 interview summaries with this particular witness, the only one that made it into the release was the one that didn't name Trump. The 3 that did name Trump were all accidentally left out. Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia said that oversight Democrats could confirm the DOJ had illegally withheld those FBI interviews. The House Oversight Committee Democrats announced they were opening a parallel investigation into why those specific documents were excluded. On March 6, 2026, just days ago, under enormous pressure from investigative reporters at CNN, NPR, PBS, and the Miami Herald, the Department of Justice finally posted the 3 missing FBI interview summaries online, 16 pages in total. And those 16 pages are now a matter of public record. They describe, in FBI agents' own summarized words, a woman's account of being sexually assaulted by the sitting president of the United States when she was a child. They describe the alleged assault in specific detail. They document her fear of retaliation for coming forward. They show that she was interviewed by federal investigators 4 separate times, meaning agents kept coming back because they found her testimony significant enough to pursue. The White House's response. Spokesperson Abigail Jackson told reporters that Trump has been totally exonerated on anything relating to Epstein. The DOJ put out a statement saying some documents in the files contain untrue and sensationalist claims about the president, and that if they had a shred of credibility, they certainly would have been weaponized against President Trump already. But here's the problem with that logic. Here's why that argument collapses under its own weight. The DOJ is run by Trump's own appointees. Pam Bondi is the Attorney General. Todd Blanche is the Deputy AG, the same Todd Blanche who was Trump's personal defense attorney before taking this job. The very people deciding which Epstein documents to release, which to redact, and which to label as not credible are people who were hired by Donald Trump, are loyal to Donald Trump, and in Blanche's case, literally defended Donald Trump in a criminal court. And they're asking us to trust their assessment of the credibility of accusations against Donald Trump. Do you see the problem? This is not an independent review. This is not a neutral process. This is the fox guarding the henhouse, and they're telling us there are no hens. And it gets even more complicated when you zoom out and look at everything else that Trump's name is connected to in these files. According to a New York Times review of the DOJ's document releases, Trump's name appears more than 38,000 times across the Epstein files. He was flagged in more than 5,300 individual documents. Now, the DOJ is quick to note, and this is a fair point, that being mentioned in a document doesn't equal guilt. Trump knew Epstein. They moved in the same social circles in New York in the 1990s. Trump himself once said in a 2002 interview that Epstein was a terrific guy, and that he liked beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. That quote has since become infamous. But beyond social mentions, the documents revealed something Trump had specifically denied. In a 2024 statement, he said, and I'm paraphrasing directly here, that he was never on Epstein's plane. The files released in December 2025 showed federal prosecutors collected evidence in 2020 that Trump had in fact flown on Epstein's private plane multiple times in the 1990s. His own denial was directly contradicted by his own government's documents. One FBI memo from a separate victim described a scenario where Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's co-conspirator who is currently serving a 20-year prison sentence for sex trafficking, presented the woman to Trump at a New York party and later told her, according to the FBI record, that Trump liked her and that she was available. That woman told investigators nothing happened between her and Trump. But the fact that Maxwell was positioning victims in proximity to powerful men like Trump is significant context that cannot be ignored. Another FBI memo references an interview with Virginia Giuffre, the most prominent Epstein survivor, the woman who accused Prince Andrew and who died by suicide in April 2025, in which Giuffre told investigators about working as a teenager at Trump's Mar-a-Lago, how she was recruited from there to work for Epstein, and about the sexual abuse she says she was subsequently subjected to at Epstein's hands. Mar-a-Lago, the same property Trump uses as his primary residence and political headquarters. Now, and I want to be crystal clear here, because I believe in intellectual honesty, I want to address the White House's arguments directly, because some of them deserve a fair hearing before we dismiss them. The DOJ argues that many of the allegations in the files are unverified tips submitted to an FBI hotline, meaning anyone could call and say anything, and those tips were logged and included in the release. That's true. The DOJ also notes that for some of the more extreme, unverified allegations, like the tip about Trump witnessing an infant's death, there is zero corroborating evidence, and investigators found them not credible. That's also worth acknowledging. And it is factually true that Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. The White House has pointed to this repeatedly, arguing that a man who had something to hide wouldn't have signed legislation requiring the release of files that could expose him. That's a logical argument on its surface. But it falls apart when you account for the political reality. Trump was going to look far worse vetoing a bill that passed 427-1. He had no choice. Signing it while simultaneously having his DOJ control the redaction process was arguably the smarter political play. Release everything in theory, control everything in practice. And based on what investigative reporters have now documented, files taken down, files missing, files labeled as duplicates when they weren't, that appears to be exactly what happened. The bipartisan backlash has been real and growing. A bipartisan group of senators has formally asked the Government Accountability Office to examine the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files, citing concerns that the department has failed to release everything required by law. That letter was updated just 3 days ago on March 11th, 2026. Lawmakers from both parties who reviewed the unredacted files at secure DOJ facilities said the redactions they saw were heavy and unnecessary. Representative Ro Khanna said he identified 6 concealed names and read them on the House floor, a dramatic act of defiance against his own government. Meanwhile, multiple Epstein victims have come forward to say they spent weeks searching the DOJ's public database for their own interview statements, statements they gave to FBI agents, statements they know exist, and found nothing. Jess Michaels, who was assaulted by Epstein when she was 22 years old, told CNN that the missing records suggest the DOJ is gaslighting the entire country. And NPR's analysis found that even after the March 6th release of those 3 missing interview summaries, there are still 37 pages of records connected to that specific Trump accuser that remain absent from the public database. Interview notes, a law enforcement report, and license records that should be there and simply aren't. There's also the question of scale that deserves serious attention. The DOJ said on January 30th, 2026, that it had met its legal obligations under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But Representative Ro Khanna noted that the department had identified over 6 million pages as potentially responsive to the law and released only about half that amount. The senior DOJ official told CNN that only about 300 gigabytes of documents have been released, which the New Republic calculated represents roughly 2% of the estimated 50 terabytes of total material the agency has in its possession. 2%. The DOJ is telling us it has released everything. While lawyers who specialize in this kind of document review are looking at the math and saying it is impossible that 3.5 million pages represents the totality of what exists in a case that the FBI investigated for years across multiple jurisdictions, involving hundreds of victims, thousands of witnesses, and decades of alleged criminal activity. Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, someone who knows exactly how these investigations work, said that the missing 302 interview documents are the most basic and important brick in the wall of any FBI investigation. When those bricks are missing, you don't have a full picture. And right now, the picture is full of holes that just happen to align with wherever Donald Trump's name appears. And while all of this is happening domestically, there is a geopolitical dimension to the Epstein story that doesn't get enough attention. Multiple countries have opened investigations following revelations that their nationals may have been victimized. In February 2026, Turkish prosecutors began reviewing the files after an opposition lawmaker highlighted allegations that Epstein had trafficked minor girls from Turkey, the Czech Republic, and Asia. Lithuanian prosecutors opened an investigation after it emerged that the files contained names of Lithuanian models and arts figures potentially connected to the network. The scope of what Epstein was doing, and who he was doing it for and with, was international. It touched governments, royalty, academia, and Wall Street simultaneously. The fact that American politics is consuming all the oxygen around the Epstein story is in some ways exactly what those in power want. Keep it partisan. Keep it about Trump versus Democrats. Keep people arguing about whether it's a witch hunt or a cover-up. And while everyone's fighting about the politics, the systematic accounting of what actually happened to thousands of victims around the world, that work never gets done. Let me tell you what justice actually looks like in a situation like this, because I think we've lost sight of it in all the noise. Justice doesn't look like a DOJ press conference where political appointees tell us which allegations are credible. Justice doesn't look like a government slide presentation that gets quietly removed from a database when reporters aren't looking. Justice doesn't look like a law that passes unanimously and then gets complied with in the most narrow, technical, minimum effort way possible while millions of pages remain hidden. Justice looks like an independent special prosecutor, someone with no connection to Trump, no connection to the Democratic establishment, no political incentive, going through every single page of every single file with full subpoena power and the ability to bring charges wherever the evidence leads. Justice looks like the victims' interview transcripts being released in full, unredacted where legally possible, so that the American people can see what these women told federal investigators with their own eyes. Justice looks like accountability for everyone in those files, not just the people who are politically convenient to expose. Because let's be honest, the Epstein network touched both sides of the aisle. The files contain references to former President Bill Clinton. They contain references to powerful Democrats, Republicans, Wall Street figures, academics, royalty. True accountability means following the evidence wherever it goes, not just where it's politically useful to go. Right now, and I need you to hear this clearly, there is a woman whose name we cannot publish, whose face we cannot show, who told FBI agents 4 times that she was 13 years old when Jeffrey Epstein introduced her to Donald Trump, and that what followed was one of the most traumatic experiences of her life. Whether you believe her or not, whether you think the allegations are credible or politically motivated, she said it. She said it 4 separate times to federal investigators. She said it with an attorney present. She said it even though she was afraid of retaliation. And the Department of Justice, the agency sworn to protect her and every other American, initially left her interviews out of the public release and only put them back when journalists caught them doing it. If that doesn't trouble you, I don't know what will. If that doesn't make you ask hard questions about who this government is actually serving, then I don't know what more I can say. Because this isn't about whether you support Trump or oppose him. This isn't about left versus right. This is about whether the most powerful office in the world is being used to shield itself from accountability. And right now, the evidence suggests the answer is yes. So what happens next? There are a few threads worth watching very carefully. First, the bipartisan GAO investigation, the Government Accountability Office inquiry that senators from both parties have now formally requested, could potentially force the DOJ to explain in public why specific documents were withheld and what its process was for deciding what to redact. That investigation was just formally requested on March 11th, 2026. It won't produce results quickly, but it creates an official record and a paper trail that will be very difficult for the DOJ to ignore. Second, the House Oversight Committee's parallel investigation into the missing Trump-related files is ongoing. Democrats on the committee have specifically called this a White House cover-up and said millions of pages remain concealed. Whether that investigation gains traction depends entirely on whether Republican committee members, who are in the majority, allow it to proceed, which, given the political dynamics, seems unlikely but not impossible given the bipartisan nature of some of the pushback we're seeing. Third, there are still 37 pages of records connected specifically to the Trump accuser that remain missing from the public database as of this week. Those pages are going to continue to be a focus of investigative reporting. Julie Brown at the Miami Herald isn't going to let this go. The reporters at CNN and NPR who did the document analysis that caught the missing files aren't going to let this go. And fourth, and perhaps most critically, there is the ongoing question of the 50 terabytes. If the DOJ has released only 2% of the total Epstein material in its possession, the question of what's in the other 98% is going to hang over this administration for its entire remaining time in office. If you made it this far, I want to genuinely thank you. This is not an easy story to sit with. It shouldn't be. But the only way forward is through the discomfort, through the politics, through the noise, to the actual truth. And if you want to stay on top of every development in this story as it continues to unfold, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is going to keep moving fast. The next few weeks with the GAO investigation, the ongoing House Oversight Inquiry, and the missing 37 pages, there is going to be a lot more to cover. And we are going to cover every single piece of it, because that's what we do here. Don't let the algorithm bury this. Share this video. The more people who see it, the harder it is to suppress. I'll see you in the next one.